Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtadharashda Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtadharashda Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Samaveta Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 14, Pregnancy of Deity in the Evening, text number 7, 8, and 9. Yes. Please repeat. Atatra pihi ha atatra pihi hasoyam. Atatrapi hasoyam Shruto me varnita pura. Shruto me varnita pura. Brahmana deva devena. Brahmana deva devena. Devanam anuprichatam. Devanam anuprichatam. Athatrapihi tihasoyam. Shruto me varnita pura. Brahmana deva devena. Devanam anuprichatam. Atatrapiti hasoyam Shruto me varnita pura. Mataji. Atatrapiti hasoyam Varnita pura. Brahmana deva devena. Devanam anuprichatam. Atha, now. Atra, in this matter. Api, also. Itihasaha, history. Ayam, this. Shrutaha, heard. Me, by me. Varnitaha, described. Pura, years ago. Brahmana, by Brahma. Deva Devena, the foremost of the demigods. Devanam, by the demigods. Anuprichatam, asking. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. This history of the fight between the Lord as a boar and the demon Hiranyaksha was heard by me in a year long ago, as it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by other demigods. Text number 8. Ditir dakshayani kshattar maricham kashyapam patim apatya kama chakkame sandhyayam hrich chayardita. Translation: Diti, daughter of Daksha, being afflicted with sex desire, begged her husband Kashyapa, the son of Marichi, to have intercourse with her in the evening in order to beget a child. Text 9. Ishtvagni jivam payasa purusham yajusham patim nimlochati arka asinam agni agare samahitam. Translation and purport. The sun was setting and the sage was sitting in trance after offering oblations to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. Purport. Fire is considered to be the tongue of the Personality of Godhead Vishnu, and oblations of grains and clarified butter offered to the fire are thus accepted by him. That is the principle of all sacrifices, of which Lord Vishnu is the master. In other words, the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu includes the satisfaction of all demigods and other living beings. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapatantikam Vande Ham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Vansha Kalpataru Vyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So while I was reading the purport just now, I was reminded of a lecture which I heard of Srila Prabhupada a couple of days ago. Actually, it wasn't a lecture, it was more a room conversation. Can we just have the fans here off, please? Just on this side. So generally when we think of Yagya, Krishna is known as Yagya Purusha, Vishnu is known as Yagya Purusha. Here Srila Prabhupada is explaining, thank you, Prabhu. They can stay on if yeah. So Srila Prabhupada here is explaining that when people perform homa, fire sacrifices, the fire in the Yagyakund is a representation of the tongue of Lord Vishnu. Elsewhere, actually twice in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in different places, it's mentioned that when one feeds the devotees of Krishna, particularly the Brahmanas, the Vaishnava Brahmanas, that's also as good as feeding Lord Krishna as well. So generally when we think of Yagya, the first thing that comes to mind, at least to my mind, is Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai, is a fire sacrifice, right? The whole Srimad Bhagavatam, the background of Srimad Bhagavatam is a group of sages. They've come together, they're sitting in a forest, the sages of Naimisharanya, and they're engaging in a years and years long sacrifice. And I don't know, perhaps they're not chanting the mantras properly or something, but instead of the fire raging, it's creating smoke and it's darkening their bodies. So generally that's what we think about. We think of a fire sacrifice. And we have, regularly homas in our temple here as well. Srila Prabhupada, when he was initially conducting fire sacrifices during the initiation of his disciples, you probably remember the story about how he told everyone to keep the windows shut. You should breathe in this smoke. It's good for you. It's purifying. And everyone was running to open the windows like that. So that's what we think about. Well, another sacrifice that we can think of, and which we glorify very much, is the Sankirtana Yagya. But even when we think of Sankirtana Yagya, which is essentially the distribution of Krishna's glories, in principle that's what it is. And specifically in Kali Yuga, Kalikale Nam Rupa Krishna Avatar. So we emphasize the distribution of Krishna's holy name. And Harinam Sankirtan is the Yuga Dharma. It is the Sankirtan Yagya. But Srila Prabhupada also emphasized the distribution of books, as we know, which contains the glorification of not only Krishna's name, but Krishna's form, his qualities, his pastimes, his entourage, his paraphernalia, everything is there. Of course, the acharyas do mention the chanting or the distribution of the holy name of Krishna is the topmost. But another yagya which we sometimes don't think of, like it doesn't come to the front of our mind, is cooking for Krishna. And when we cook for Krishna, we cook nice bhoga for Krishna, we offer it to Krishna with love. Ashnami prayatatmana, Krishna says, if you offer it with love, then he accepts it. In fact, he doesn't need our foodstuffs, the physical foodstuffs, but he eats our love. Krishna says, Srila Prabhupada says, Premananda. I'll talk about that. That was in the lecture that I was listening to. And then when we have that prasad, we distribute the prasad. But it's not just prasad that we're distributing. So Srila Prabhupada was mentioning in this lecture, in this room conversation rather, that when we offer bhoga to Krishna with love, that's prema, right? And then Krishna tastes that prema, and then he gets ananda, he gets happiness, he gets bliss. So it is that prem ananda that we are distributing to the masses of people. It is not ordinary food stuff that we are distributing to people. We are distributing the prem ananda, which the devotee who cooked, labored so hard for so many hours, and out of love offered the food to Krishna. Krishna tasting that food, that love, he got ananda. It is that prema ananda, Srila Prabhupada says, that we are distributing. So that is the yagya. That is the sacrifice. Now, the context of this particular room conversation was that, from what I could understand, is that there was a big preaching program somewhere. I can't remember where it was. And Srila Prabhupada was intimately talking with a group of his disciples. And for whatever reason, I suspect, because Srila Prabhupada was saying on this point, but I suspect that the problem that they had in cooking prasad for all these people, and there was thousands of people that came to this program, by the way, apparently due to a lack of funds, there may have been other issues or problems there. But Srila Prabhupada was emphasizing this. The prasad which they cooked was not of a good standard, not of a good quality. And if you want to hear Srila Prabhupada roar, you have to hear this room conversation. I think it's called something like Love Feast Was the Beginning. I think that's the title of it. Love Feast Was the Beginning. So Srila Prabhupada is roaring at these group of disciples, not just for the sake of it. It's transcendental anger which Srila Prabhupada was displaying for a purpose. And how can you tell that? Because Srila Prabhupada at one point in time in the lecture, he'll be chastising them intensely.
And at the next moment, he'll be like, it's okay, you did your best. And then again, they'll ask a question, but Srila Prabhupada, the dal we cooked had sufficient vegetables in it. And then Srila Prabhupada would go at them again. It wasn't good enough. In fact, Srila Prabhupada said that this is 10th class food. The food you have cooked is not even fit for a dog to eat, Srila Prabhupada is saying. So he was very heavy. So he was telling the disciples, he was speaking about yagya. And he was saying, all living beings are subsisting on food grains which come from the rains. And he was quoting Bhagavad Gita. He's getting, I think Hari Saripur was there. He was asking him, what is that verse? And Hari Saripur would immediately find the verse. And he was, as you probably know in room conversations, Srila Prabhupada always has someone with him. Srila Prabhupada says, find that verse. He says half the verse, or just the first line, and then he asks his disciple or his secretary, find that verse. And immediately they'll find the verse and they'll quote it to the person that Srila Prabhupada is talking to. So, like that, Srila Prabhupada emphasized. And he was saying that finance should not be an issue. Don't let finances be an issue for cooking tasty prasad. Prabhupada said, the karmis, they're not coming to hear the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. They are coming to fill their bellies. Therefore, our preaching tactic, the fishing line, the bait that we're throwing is tasty prasad. It should be simple, healthy, but tasty prasad. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned something interesting. He also said that our prasad should be so tasty that even someone who has no appetite, upon seeing this prasad, he'll want to eat it. Not that, Srila Prabhupada said, not that they're hungry and they see the prasad and they don't want to eat it. So Srila Prabhupada is really having a go at his disciples there. And yes, they're proposing plans to Srila Prabhupada as to how they can improve. So Srila Prabhupada said, tomorrow I want to see another 1,000 people coming to this program just by the tasty prasad that you've cooked. So I remember my Guru Maharaj was saying in a lecture that in a Krishna conscious community, in a temple community, whatnot, there are many important devotees. You could say the preachers, or let's say the pujaris, or maybe devotees who are managing the temple, like that. But he was mentioning that quite often we miss out on a very important devotee, and that is the cook. Because it is the cook who can influence, who has the potential ability to influence the consciousness of a lot of devotees. Whoever takes the prasad is influenced by that. We know there are stories of devotees who, when they cook prasad, their consciousness gets infused in the prasad. We've heard of that. And if someone who is not chanting Hare Krishna, the reason why we don't take food which is cooked by them is for the exact same reason, that it can adversely affect our consciousness. Krishna says in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Yagyashishta shanto mucchante sarva kilbishay bunjite tetva agam papam ye pachanti atmakaranad. So he mentions the principle that those who are devotees, they cook food, they offer the food to Krishna, and they eat the food as a sacrifice to Krishna, to sustain their bodies in Krishna's service. Srila Prabhupada delineates the principle of mitahar. We've all heard this principle of mitahar. Jai Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai. It's a very difficult thing to do, to eat, if you're hungry, just to eat half your stomach's worth full of food, right? And then the other quarter with water or some liquid, and the other quarter you're supposed to leave empty. Prabhupada says for digestion. Now in Chaitanya Charitamrita we see someone like Raghunath Das Goswami, and there's a verse which mentions that Raghunath Das Goswami never allowed even a tiny bit of sense gratification for his tongue. And we know what he did consequently when he initially started begging, and then he didn't want to do that at the Simhadwara, and then he eventually went to the back of the temple and he was eating food grains which were not even fit for cows to eat. There's a very high level of renunciation. But it is this virakti, which is a key or detachment, vairagya, which is the key principle, which is sustaining the lives of Lord Chaitanya's devotees in Krishna consciousness. And this principle is greatly satisfying to Lord Chaitanya as well. So they've done these studies on this concept called food with embedded consciousness. So in the world today, somewhere, they're actually selling food as a niche market where people are buying food which has been blessed by, monks, saintly people, and people are starting to realize that it has some effect on our consciousness, and we should eat food which is cooked by people in a proper consciousness, and we should also eat it in a proper consciousness as well. I was mentioning some time back in a Bhagam class that unofficially there is some scientific experiments which have been conducted. Masaru Emoto, you probably know him, the Japanese scientist who conducted experiments on the water crystals, how he got people to bless some glasses of water. He got people to shout and scream at some glasses of water, and some glasses of water, they were blessed by certain people, monks, saintly people like that. And then he froze these cups of water, and he looked at the ice crystals which are formed under the microscope, and he saw that those which had been blessed or praised even, these crystals which were formed were very beautiful to look at. But glasses of water which were shouted at, yelled at, or some death metal music or whatnot was played to them, the crystals were very amorphous. Unofficially, there's another experiment which was performed by a lady. I think it was in conjunction with some professors in a university in Canada. I forget her name. But she did the same thing, but with plants as well. So she had pot plants, and she allowed these pot plants to be exposed to different sound vibrations. Again, same thing. Loud screaming and classical music and all these sort of things. And then she observed the growth of the plants over several weeks, and she found that plants actually grew towards the speaker for things like classical music, and they grew away from the speaker for sound vibrations which were not so good for the plant. So it shows that obviously plants have consciousness, and there's super consciousness in matter as well, and we understand that that is Krishna as Paramatma. But in that experiment which she performed, the scientists found that the best sound vibration, at least to the, in terms of the criteria, in terms of the variables that they tested the plants with, was Hindustani classical music with tablas and kartals and all that sort of stuff. So plants apparently really like that music and they really grew towards the speaker in that respect. So yes, so the point is that the cook is very important. It's a very important position. And we don't have to be the cook of some big Krishna conscious community. I'm sure all of you here, you cook in your own houses as well. You cook for yourselves. So your consciousness and your state of mind is very important for that. And one way in which we can really make sure that the offering is good is if we're always in a dependent position. Like I remember Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, one of his famous quotes is that empowerment comes to devotees when they take on a task which is beyond their capacity. If you're performing tasks in Krishna consciousness, which is well within your capacity, then you don't need extra empowerment from Krishna, from the spiritual master. But when you go out on a limb and you do things which are against your nature, or you're very scared of them, doing such tasks, then that's when Krishna empowers you. So I remember, this was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I went to New Zealand with Kamsari Prabhu, and I went there for a mid-year festival. It was like a winter festival. And I went there to get my second initiation. So there I was sitting one morning in Bhagavatam class. My spiritual master is, giving Bhagavatam class, and I'm flanked by about 100 of my God brothers and God sisters and some other devotees as well. All of a sudden, one of the Matajis just walks right over to me, taps me on the shoulder, and she says, "I heard you're a good cook." I'm like, "What? Who told you that? I'm not a good cook. I don't know how to cook well." And she says, "I heard you're a good cook." She was probably lying because she wanted the service done. But she says, "I heard you're a good cook." Okay. So there's no one here to cook breakfast for all the devotees here. So can you please cook breakfast for everyone? So there I am sitting in the middle of Bhagavatam class, and she's just very, in a daring way, just telling me this. And she said, "Okay, come outside." Then I came outside, and Kamsari Prabhu was sitting somewhere far away from me. I couldn't even ask him to come and help me. So there I am being dragged out by myself alone out of the Bhagavatam class, and she says, "So you can cook whatever you like." There's a makeshift satellite kitchen. I don't know where anything is. I don't even know how to turn on the gas. And I have 40 minutes to cook breakfast for 100 devotees. And my reputation is on the line. Because apparently I'm a good cook, right? So anyway, there was one devotee there, one senior devotee. I remember he was prepping, he was cutting the vegetables for the lunch. He had hours. I had 40 minutes. I asked him, "How do I turn on the gas?" He showed me how to turn on the gas. "What bhoga do we have?" And he gave me a suggestion. "You can cook some poha. Either you cook poha or you cook pasta," something like that, he said. So I said, "Okay, I have experience cooking poha for maybe 5 or 6 brahmacharis in the temple. So let me just try that." So there I was forcefully placed in a situation where I had to do something which I'd never done before. Right? Again, I went out of my comfort zone to do this. I didn't want to say I can't do it either. I was very proud. I didn't want to say I can't do it, but I wanted to take this opportunity to try, because I had some experience, and I wanted to try. So I cooked, and the whole time I was completely depending on Krishna, just praying and praying and praying. I managed to cook the poha, and managed to cook a tomato chutney as well to go along with it. I had some 15 minutes left at the end, so I managed to cook some tomato chutney. And then it was served out. And devotees said, it was good. It was okay. It was really nice. They liked it. So that was a personal experience for me, which showed to me, which proved to me that prasad is really powerful. Devotees were coming up and they were saying, "Well done, Prabhu, this is really nice prasad." So the temple cook, or cooks in general in Krishna consciousness, they have that very important position where they can either upset a whole lot of people because of not cooking very nice prasad, or they can get the blessings of hundreds and hundreds of people. So very important position. If we think physiologically even, if we compare, let's say, the human species to the animal species, we can see that our body is not designed optimally to eat non-vegetarian foodstuffs. Obviously, our canine teeth are not as sharp and not as long as a tiger's or a bear's, like that. The another point is our intestines. The intestines of carnivorous animals, they're something like 3 meters, whereas for us, there's something like 10 to 12 meters long. If we eat raw meat, and it's supposed to pass through an intestine which is so long, the meat can decompose, it can get putrid, it can cause a lot of diseases in the gut. Whereas carnivorous animals, they can quickly eliminate that from their bodies, they can quickly digest it because of their shorter intestines. Another thing is that carnivorous animals, they usually sweat from their tongue, like dogs, or they sweat from their paws, their sweat glands on their paws. Whereas for us, our sweat glands are through our skin. Because when carnivorous animals want to eat, they have to hunt, they have to run, exert a lot of energy. So when they're running, they have to be able to sweat as well. If you sweat through your skin, it's a very slow process. So we're not designed to run and chase after animals and hunt them and kill them. But Krishna has given us that chance, right? He's given us the option to choose. Srila Prabhupada was saying in a purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita that we live in a civilization where it's very normal for people to eat meat, fish, eggs, like that. So he said, if we want to stop this sinful eating habits of the masses of people, Srila Prabhupada was saying, this is in the section where Madhavendra Puri, we all know the famous Madhavendra Puri, the grand spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya, how he started the Annakut ceremony. Not just one day, he did it in one day. But day after day after day, villagers were coming from all the surrounding villages and they were requesting Madhavendra Puri, we want to perform the ceremony as well. So he was piling foodstuffs on top of Govardhan Hill for this Gopal deity that he had installed. So in that section, Srila Prabhupada says, if we, the Hare Krishna movement, want to stop these sinful activities, which is so prolific and widespread in today's society, then we have to cook very nice, tasty prasad and distribute it on a mass scale. Actually, Srila Prabhupada was saying in that lecture I was listening to, that if they taste some nice kachoris, some nice rasgullas like that, then they wouldn't want to eat foodstuffs. But I remember Kamsa Haripur was saying something about Burma, about some pots of, we won't get there, go there. But Rupa Goswami says, right? He says, when the disease is there, Swadvi kramad bhavati tad gada mula hantri. He says, by eating rock candy, Hare Krishna, by eating rock candy, initially it tastes bitter. But by constantly eating it, then that natural taste comes again. So when people taste prasad, of course, if it's tasty, they'll love it. And in some cases, because of cultural conditioning or whatnot, they may not like it. But by giving that opportunity for people to come forward and take prasad, and also educating them about the value of prasad, that's very important. Another thing my spiritual master said, and this is apparently something which Srila Prabhupada said as well, that if someone takes prasad without knowing that it's prasad and knowing its spiritual benefit, then they won't necessarily get a human body in their next life. They may get an animal body or some other body, but Krishna will guarantee that they get the opportunity to eat prasad in the future at some point in time. But if we distribute prasad to people and at the same time educate them about what it is, it's offered to Krishna, it's spiritual, it's, so that when they eat it, they respectfully eat it. They have some sort of understanding that it's not normal food. Then, out of that appreciation, that is service. The other one is agyata sukriti. But if you serve Krishna with knowledge, that's more substantial. That's mentioned in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as well. That sacrifice is supposed to inculcate knowledge. We're supposed to get knowledge through sacrifice. But if we make it easy for the people by giving them knowledge while we give them prasad, so Srila Prabhupada says, my Guru Maharaj was saying, that when they take prasad with the knowledge and understanding of what it is, then it is guaranteed that they'll get a human birth. So that's something important. Next time you're giving prasad to someone, make sure that they understand its spiritual significance. That's about yagya. I just wanted to mention one other thing, because here we're finding now that both Vidura and Maitreya, they're going more in depth in their conversation. Who was it? I think it was Radhavinoda Prabhu. He was saying that they've already spoken for such a long time, but the topics of Krishna are such that we don't tire from it. And that's something which Vidura was mentioning before. Remember that verse where Maitreya Muni glorified him as being a warrior? Not just because he came from a Kshatriya family, but because he loved hearing the chivalrous pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Varaha fighting with Hiranyaksha, Lord Nrsimha fighting with Hiranyakshipu. because he was interested in hearing such pastimes, just like we see Bhishmadev is interested in Viryaras, in fighting with Krishna. That's how he wants to leave his body. His perfect darshan of Krishna is seeing Krishna charging towards him with a chariot wheel in his hand, about to hurl it at him. For him, this is Krishna prema. He loves to see Krishna with sweat, beads of sweat rolling down his transcendental forehead, with blood, drops of blood across his face from the other warriors. That's his vision that he meditates on, because he's a warrior. Vidura is also described as adrita, someone who is eager to hear. One other thing which Vidura was telling to Maitreya recently, some verses back, is that I am not satisfied with what you've told me so far. I want to hear more. Please tell me more about this pastime. You've told me in the last chapter that Varaha came and you intermingled that pastime with bits and pieces of Rakta Varaha, who came in Chakshusha Manvantar, right? The red Varaha, and he's the one that battled with Hiranyaksha. So tell me more about this Varaha. Who is this Hiranyaksha? Where did he come from? And that's how we're getting to this present chapter, the pregnancy of Diti in the evening, because it is from her womb that those two great devotees of Krishna appeared as demons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakshipu. So this point of satisfaction, why is Vidura saying to Maitreya, I'm not satisfied? Isn't Krishna consciousness supposed to satisfy the soul? Doesn't Srila Prabhupada say that it is not an artificial imposition on our mind? It is something natural and inherent within us. So why is he saying that I'm not satisfied? Well, you see, there's two types of dissatisfaction. There's dissatisfaction on the material platform, and there's dissatisfaction on the spiritual platform. Rupa Goswami says, Kamadinam katina katita parita durnideshas Tesham jata maina kuruna natrapa nopashanti utsrijaitam atayadupate sampritam labda buddhis tvamayatam sharanam abhayam mam niyungshat madase. So in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he quotes this very beautiful verse. Apparently it's him. I'm not sure of the context in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu where this comes. He may be quoting it from another Shastra, and it may be another devotee which is saying this verse. But this verse is saying, my dear Lord Krishna, for so many births, I've been a sold-out master to my senses. Natripa nopashanti. And by serving my senses, natripa, I have not become satisfied. Nopashanti, neither am I peaceful. I serve my senses, and they're never satiated, never satisfied with my service. They demand more service from me. But utsrijaitam atayudupate sampritam labda buddhis. Now my buddhi has become fixed on your lotus feet. And what is the result? Tvam ayata sharanam abhayam. Now I'm coming. I have come to the shelter of your lotus feet, which are fearless. Mam nyungshvat madasya. Please accept me as your servant. I'm your servant, Krishna. I'm not a servant to my senses. I'm not a servant to my mind. Lord Chaitanya has perfectly summarized our constitutional identity when he says, Gopi Bhartur Padakamalur Das Dasuda Anudas. Right? He says that. I'm not any member of any Varnashram system. He says, I only identify myself. So Lord Chaitanya only identifies himself as a servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, who is the maintainer of the gopis. So we can follow in that footstep. That is our sambandha. Sambandha, abhideya, and prayojana. That is our sambandha. That is our identification in relationship to Krishna. So in the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it's mentioned that this lust, which is our desire to enjoy separately from Krishna, it's like a raging wildfire which doesn't satisfy us. You know, there's two enemies that Krishna identifies for us in the Bhagavad Gita, for the soul. One is lust. Does anyone know what the second enemy is? Any ideas? Yes. 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says to Arjuna that the controlled mind is your best friend, but that same best friend, when it's uncontrolled, when it's like that wild monkey, becomes your worst enemy. So in the 6th chapter he says, your mind is the worst enemy, the uncontrolled mind. And in the 3rd chapter he says to Arjuna, when Arjuna asks, my dear Lord Krishna, what is it that impels us to sinful acts? Is this by force, even though we don't desire to commit them? And he says, it is lust only, which is born from the mode of passion, which later is transformed into wrath, kamesha, Kamesha, krodesha, rajaguna samudbhava, mahashano mahapatma, vidyanam ihvairanam. So, material dissatisfaction means that you perform some sense gratification and you get burnt out by it. It doesn't fulfill your desires. It doesn't live up to your expectations that you have, to your mental concoctions. Your manoratha concocts so much greatness, so much results it promises from sense gratification, but it doesn't live up to that. So you get dissatisfied, and what is the result of that? You turn to tyaga. Bhoga, tyaga. Material attachment, material detachment. But because the soul is anandamayobhyasat, it is always pleasure seeking. If it doesn't have access to knowledge of a higher quality of pleasure, then it is forced to go back to material pleasure. That is the pendulum of bhoga and tyaga. So once you're materially dissatisfied, you don't want to engage anymore in materialistic enjoyment, sense gratification, at least for some time. Now let's analyze spiritual dissatisfaction. Maitreya has told Vidura about the pastimes of Shvetavaraha. And Vidura is telling Maitreya, after hearing all this, I'm dissatisfied. Please go on telling me more. You understand the difference? On the material sphere, if you're dissatisfied, you don't want to do it. You don't want to do that thing. You want to run away from it, do something else. But in Krishna consciousness, that dissatisfaction propels you to go deeper into Krishna consciousness. And we perhaps have practical experience of that as well. Like, I'm guessing you have all been practicing Krishna consciousness for a good amount of years, at least 10 years, 15 years like that. Some of us more. So you can look back in your days, maybe the first couple of years in Krishna consciousness. Indeed, you were feeling some sort of satisfaction. You were feeling some sort of advancement in Krishna consciousness because of you engaging in service to Krishna and satisfying Krishna. But if you've been practicing Krishna consciousness properly, then even though those times were nice, you wouldn't want to go back to the level of satisfaction that you were feeling at that time. Even though you may have nice memories, still your level of advancement was most likely not as high as it is right now. So comparatively speaking, you would be feeling more contentment, more happiness, more satisfaction in Krishna consciousness right now than you were then. Even though back then you were also satisfied. But that level of dissatisfaction, just like if we serve Krishna, we feel satisfaction knowing that Krishna is happy with us. But that is not all for a devotee. The devotee wants to unlimitedly please Krishna. He wants to go on increasing the quality and the quantity of his or her service to Krishna. So in that way, the devotee is dissatisfied. And that dissatisfaction propels us to advance more. And it's the same thing with lamentation as well. And I'll finish with this point. Asha Bandha, another thing that Rupa Goswami says. Hope against hope that Krishna will give me his mercy. On the material sphere, if we're lamenting, if we're depressed, if we're full of anxiety, then we don't want to wake up in the morning. We don't want to face the world, other people. We don't want to perform our duties. But we see the Goswamis, they're lamenting, Krishna, where are you? We've been practicing for years and years. We've given up our materialistic lifestyle. We were great ministers in the court of the Nawab. We had great wealth, Raghunath Das Goswami, he had the opulence which rivaled Indra. And he gave that up to join the Hare Krishna movement. And after years of searching for Krishna, they're still lamenting, where is Krishna? I can't see him. Here, there, where is he? But does that mean that they're thinking, let's just give up this whole thing, it's not worth it? No, they're going on. It's propelling them more. Lamentation, which makes us stop Krishna consciousness, is not transcendental. It's the mode of ignorance. Self-absorption. Lamentation essentially means self-absorption. I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm not good enough to do such and such service. One senior devotee, he mentions that this is actually one of the tricks of Maya. Because it's turning our attention away from Krishna and it's making us think about ourselves. And we're completely forgetting one of the principal instructions of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Repeatedly Krishna says, focus your mind on me, focus your intelligence on me. So many verses in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, always think of me and never forget me. So, so that is what is happening here. Vidura wants to go deeper in his Krishna consciousness because he's dissatisfied, because he hasn't got enough nectar from Maitreya Muni. So, stop here. Thank you very much. I think Prabhu had his hand up first, if it's okay.
Reflecting on the purport, apart from the consciousness of the person cooking the bhoga, is it also important to take into account purity of the ingredients, such as like grains and...
Yeah, that's there in the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna segregates foodstuffs in different modes. Mode of goodness, mode of passion, mode of ignorance. He says, foods in the mode of goodness, Prabhupada mentioned the Prabhupada, food, grains, sugars, cereals, rice, pulses, vegetables, fruits. And he says, Krishna says to Arjuna, foods in the mode of goodness increase the duration of your life. They're juicy, wholesome, fatty, and nourishing to the heart. Yeah? And then similarly, passion and ignorance.
What I meant to say is the purity of the ingredients. I'm not talking about the type of ingredients.
What do you mean by purity?
Purity, whatever we get from bullies, markets, these.
It's not in our control. But, we're not growing our foodstuffs. If we were, that would be possible. So Prabhupada's principle is to make the best use of a bad bargain. Krishna understands, but whatever we can control, we should do that properly. The standard is set by Raghava Pandit, cooking for Krishna. So you can look more into Raghava Pandit. Yes, Prabhu.
Just going back to the day of the second initiation in New Zealand, and then you were hearing from your spiritual master, and then you got the instruction from the Vaishnava, and then you got up and left. So when I was in Vrindavan, I was in Pundarika Goswami's house, and a similar situation happened where a Vaishnava came to me, we need paraphernalia for worship, can you leave? Okay, and then I got up and left. Later on, Indra Goswami chastised me quite heavily. You left Pundarika Goswami's class, that's a big offense. So essentially, what do we do? What is better, to sit there submissively in the class of our spiritual master, or to get up and engage in the devotional service if a situation arises?
I guess that's a tough one. Because you're in that situation where you can't ask your spiritual master as well. And you can't ask any senior devotees next to you, otherwise it'll disturb the class or whatever. In this instant, I just wasn't thinking. I was just so bewildered. And I was thinking, if I didn't do it, then who's going to do it? That thought also crossed my mind as well. I could have got chastised by my spiritual master as well. But then I would explain the situation. Obviously, I wouldn't get into trouble. I was told by a senior devotee. I was just following instructions. But I'm not sure. It also depends on the mood of your spiritual master as well. One thing is that, like in terms of Vaishnava etiquette, is that if there's something which is, is not sort of right between you and another devotee, you know how sometimes we get into those Cold War situations and we don't want to take the next step to sort of patch it up. So if that sort of thing is there in your heart, I might have, disrespected my spiritual master or such and such Vaishnava, then immediately at the next moment you can approach them and just explain the situation. So you can just say, I got up and left, and dear spiritual master, this was the reason. Please correct me if it was the wrong thing to do, but this is what my intelligence told me to do. Like that, like in principle, that's what I would say. But it's difficult. Devotional service is like that, right? Even Mother Yashoda, Prabhupada says, even Mother Yashoda is facing that dilemma. Do I focus on the milk boiling on the stove, or do I feed Krishna? He's crying. What do I do? And Krishna got upset. He wanted to chastise his mother by running away somewhere and breaking pots. But it's all done for the pleasure of Krishna. So if our intention is like that, we can always explain it to the devotee in question. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada. Yeah.
I was just going to make one comment. I really like this point about don't just be prashadam but educate about the spiritual benefit.
Yes.
And I used to live in the Southern Shire, and everybody from the Southern Shire has holidays on the Gold Coast. And I have to meet people over and over again, people like at work and schools and things, that they didn't know I was a devotee. They talk about, we're going to the Gold Coast, we're going to eat at Govinda.
Wow.
Everybody knows Govindas, and they would say, I love Govindas. I love the Hare Krishna food. I love Govindas. And I was just reflecting, I was reflect on that there is actually also a devotee restaurant, cafe in Southern Shire, but nobody knows that it's run by devotees.
Oh, okay.
So they go there, they like it, but there's not this knowledge that it's
Is it on the main strip next to the station?
The Hut Soul Cafe.
Oh, okay.
The Hut Soul Cafe down the beach. And it's run by devotees, and they offer it. But it's not, it doesn't have that name as Hut Soul. I don't know, maybe it's something good, but it's not obvious that it's Krishna food. And I just was reflecting when you made that point about the difference. That people really love that. It's almost like they have, not maybe even direct spiritual knowledge about the value of prashadam, but they know it's Hare Krishna food. It seems to
Yeah.
bring them to another level of appreciation.
I remember, like, in Hari's Vegetarian, in our temple restaurant, which we had down near Central Station, we would have kirtan going on there 24/7. Well, not 24/7, however long that restaurant was open for.